Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Drews. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at LMN. Today, I'm joined with Monica Muir, who is a QuickBooks solutions provider at Muir and Associates. How are you today, Monica?
I'm doing great. How about you, Jason?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for asking. Happy to have the opportunity to chat with you today. And today we get to cover job costing, which is definitely, one of the more popular topics here at LMN. So we're super excited. For everyone that's attending, specifically today, Monica is going to show us how to use the data that LMN is sending over to QuickBooks as far as your estimates, timesheets, and invoices go, so that you can run job costing reports to help you run and manage your business. If anyone has any questions as we go, please feel free to put those in the chat and we'll do our best to get through them all at the end of this webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Monica so you can take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I appreciate being here and welcome everyone on the call. So today we're going to take a look at how you save time and increase your profits when you're using LMN along with QuickBooks Enterprise. So we're looking at how you can streamline the workflow and better job costing. So today we're going to take a look at basically your entire workflow from when you start with your jobs and you enter the estimates, the time tracking that goes in, monitoring the jobs and invoicing, and then reviewing how you did with the reporting. So kind of taking a quick look at the entire workflow here. And it does all start with the estimate for a job. So LMN is great. They work as your CRM or customer relation management tool if you haven't heard of CRM yet. But it's great that they will let you put leads in, they'll maintain them. One of the things I really like is they'll keep them in there, and the only thing that comes over into QuickBooks is the jobs that get awarded. So you don't have to worry about if looking at a customer list and who really is a customer and who was a lead, but they never actually went forward with the job. The other thing that I also like is I have had clients come to me and they said they've had problems with job costing. And when we take a look, what I have found is that they have the customers listed, but they don't have any jobs identified. So what happens for many of you, I'm hoping that you're maybe doing the lawn maintenance, maybe you've done some irrigation or lighting, and maybe you've done an install project. So you might find that there's overlap on the jobs while you're at the customer site. And if there's overlap, then a lot of times it becomes hard if you don't have a job named to be able to identify, or look at how you did on the job and be able to monitor or invoice. So having the job name is definitely a good thing to have, and I like that this all comes over. And the other thing to know too, in terms of the customer list in QuickBooks, it's part of a bigger list in the names list. So some of you have seen you can't have like a customer and a vendor or vendor and employee, but your names list is your customers, including your jobs, and your vendors, employees, and other names list. If you are in QuickBooks Pro and Premier, there's a limit to how big those lists can be. And active as well as inactive do count. So it doesn't matter if you've made them inactive, they still count in that list. So the nice thing is that I haven't seen many landscapers reach that limit, but just good to know that you don't have to worry about that. Enterprise customers generally don't at all. So after you've got when the estimate comes over from LMN into QuickBooks, a few things. One, it's great that you don't have to do the work. If you look at the estimate that came over, one of the nice things is you've got the description. So if you were going to invoice off this estimate, you don't have to type in the description. It's already there for you. I really like that. I love that it really saves time because it does take a lot of time sometimes to do these. I am a big proponent of having the estimate in QuickBooks and not just all your cost and invoicing in QuickBooks. So you can run an estimated versus actual. So this way, LMN does a great job on estimating, and then they just send that over. So that part's taken care of for you. So I think that's really nice. The other thing, and I'll mention this later because it comes into play when you're looking at the reporting, is in the estimates in QuickBooks you're looking at here. We've turned on the markup column so you can see. I know when you're working on the estimate in LMN, you're working towards a profit margin. So just so you know, I'll circle back where we look at the reports and see where this comes into play. So just wanted you to know that sometimes things might look a tad different than what you anticipated. The next part then, once you've got the job started, obviously is taking a look at the labor. And one of the things I love about LMN, there's a lot of things I love about LMN, but is that you can use the time map and it will send the time over into QuickBooks. And having done the books for a landscaper, you know, it can be a lot of work. I know a lot of times you're very focused on, are the crews going over on their time on the job? No one is tracking how long it's taking to do the timesheets or the payroll. And especially for the maintenance crew, and I know these are not typical numbers for how long they can be on site. You know, they could be on site for 15 minutes and then they're on to the next place. So this can take a lot of time. So the idea that this is taken care of for you by LMN, I think is just
Monica,
great. Yeah.
Monica, sorry, just to jump in here. It looks like
Yep.
your slideshow there is still on the intro page.
Really? Aren't you seeing my screen?
There we go. Awesome. Now it's updated.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Just wanted to jump in there and let you know. Sorry. You can
I thought you did. I thought you saw. I'm so sorry. Do I need it back up?
Yeah, let's back up and just show the previous slide there. I think that'd be great. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there's where the lead comes in for the estimate comes in with the job name, so you can see the job, and you folks will get the slide deck from here as well, I think. And then here is the estimate, so you can see the detail that came over from LMN, and you can see the markup that what shows in QuickBooks. That's what they use in the estimating, which is different than the profit margin that I mentioned. See the detail here, but you can invoice off of here if you needed to. And then here is the labor. So we were talking about the time coming over from LMN, and then the LMN will populate the timesheet. So here's the timesheet in QuickBooks. And then the next step, if you're running payroll in QuickBooks, this is where one of the places where QuickBooks can shine when it comes to job costing is that you can create paychecks based on the time. And what I want you to see, this is what you would see inside of QuickBooks. It's not what your employee would see. But you can actually see that for every job that they were on, you can see the time actually shows up in here. So QuickBooks will actually prorate all the wage information across the various jobs, no matter if they were there for 15 minutes or if they were there all day. So to me, that's huge when it comes to saving time, but also really huge in terms of job costing. And even for my clients who want to outsource payroll, and trust me, I get wanting to outsource payroll, but the job costing is better in QuickBooks. So a lot of times we will turn on a manual payroll in QuickBooks so that we can get the actual jobs, we can get cost allocated to the jobs, and then there is a trick so you don't actually double expense your payroll. So just so you know that that is an option, but this is why we like to do it inside of QuickBooks.
That's great. And just to add there too, so everyone's aware, the information that you're seeing there that Monica is showing us comes over from Element Time. So the foremen that are using the app are going to clock in from their phone, and then those timesheets get synced right over to QuickBooks. So no manual entry here. They just clock in and create those timesheets right from their phone. You review and approve them from the admin side, and then that's how you can save quite a bit of time, obviously, versus manually creating those timesheets in QuickBooks. So appreciate you showing us that, Monica.
Great. Okay. So if you are using QuickBooks Enterprise, a few reasons why I like QuickBooks Enterprise that we'll tap on, but Enterprise actually has a report called committed cost. So in order to run that report, you do have to have an estimate in QuickBooks. So the nice thing is LMN already sent the estimate over. You enter, obviously, your actual costs as you're going through the job, but committed cost in this particular column would be if you use purchase orders to order your materials or with working with subs, that you know that you're going to have to pay for that. And that's what this is saying, is that you've committed to pay for it, but you don't have the bill yet. you can actually drill down in this particular column and see the actual purchase orders or item receipts that might be there. What I really like about it is this is the only place where I've seen a lot of times people want to know approximate information on labor cost. And if you were doing payroll in QuickBooks, you have the time in QuickBooks, so LMN would send over the time. Then QuickBooks in this report will actually give you an approximate unpaid wage information. This is just pulling on the wage. It's not including the employer taxes or anything else that you might have on their paycheck, but does give you definitely a good step in figuring out where are you cost-wise in terms of your labor cost. And then here is the total cost and just letting you know kind of on the job where you are. So I know over in LMN, you've got ways of monitoring, but this is nice over in QuickBooks. Another quick comment on QuickBooks Enterprise, the payroll subscription is actually included. So that is a nice feature with the Enterprise Gold. And so once now we've gotten to the point where either you're done with the job or at least you want to get out the first invoice, what's great is that LMN will send the invoice, can send an invoice over into QuickBooks. And so again, you don't have to rekey. One of the types of invoices I love that they send over would be like if you're doing a per cut instead of maybe a fixed price. And those can be a lot of work to do if you're going to do them in QuickBooks. And I'm sure LMN's got an automated way that they can do that. So that's taken care of. And then it quickly comes over here so you can get the invoice out the door to your customer.
Yeah, so you're definitely correct there. So Element Pro users especially can use our invoicing tool to generate invoices for anything that they set up for monthly contracts, for hourly time and material type of work, anything that you charge per visit. Those things would generate in Element, and then they sync right over here to QuickBooks as an invoice. So you'd still send it out from QuickBooks, which means you get to track your payments through QuickBooks, and customers are still going to get that same template that they're used to as well, which is nice.
Okay, thank you. And if you decide you are going to invoice off of an estimate in QuickBooks, again, because LMN sent the estimate over, that's one step you could check off, right? But what I love is you can just simply click on Create Invoice, and from here it will copy. It can copy everything that's on here, and if you're invoicing in full, then that's great. If you're going to invoice in part, you get to pick and choose what you would put on the invoice, but it definitely simplifies being able to do that. And again, you have the descriptions of, whatever you wanted to show on the invoice that comes in. So the next step would be to review the job profitability reports, and there's 3 in particular that I want to take a look at: the estimated versus actual, job profitability, and P&L for the job. The reason being they all show something different about your job, and there are some common misunderstandings with a few of them. So if we take a look at the estimated versus actual, this is nice because your actual costs are over here. So while LMN had you work up an estimate, the actual costs come over here, so you can see what your actual costs are. If you were doing a fixed price, then generally there's no change in revenue. If it's time and materials, then you might see some differences in here on that. But a good place, if it's a long job, then you can obviously monitor during that job. If it's short, then you're probably looking at this at the end of the project. One thing to note, because the estimates and invoices actually use your items, and these are your service items that you would have mapped with LMN, then that pulls from that items list. And I mention that because you'll see in reports they pull from different places. But great that you can kind of see how you're doing here. And another report that people can look at is a job profitability detail report. And again, this is pulling from the items list. And what I have found with many of my clients is that initially when they're entering their job costs, they're putting them into a cost of goods account, which is great, but they didn't use an item. So a lot of times what you might see in this report is you might see the payroll part coming in, but you might not see some of the other costs coming in, and maybe a big number that says no item, and no item simply means you did not use an item when you enter the job cost. but I've seen it as large as like around 100,000. And for 100,000, I think I'd want to know the detail. But the idea with this report is that if you wanted more detail when you're looking at your job, how did we do? This is where you could have more detail if you wanted to. So you can keep it simple, or you can have more information in here, but that's the whole purpose, is that jobs are different, and so you could have the uniqueness of the job in here showing in the report. Another thing to note, remember I commented on the estimate that if you have the markup column showing in QuickBooks that QuickBooks was going to mark up your estimate, but in LMN you were working towards a profit margin. So if you turn on the percent difference here, this is actually looking at markup, and it's good to know that that's what that is, number one. And number two, when we take a look at the next report, you'll see why they're different. And it took me a while to actually piece that together. But the other nice thing is in that job profitability detail report, remember I talked about how the job costing is really good in QuickBooks. You can drill down. So I can take this hardscape project, which turned out to be my labor cost. Notice that it pulls in the paychecks that you had from the that were on the job, and it pulls in their wage information, but it also pulls in the payroll taxes. Now, if you really had the payroll turned on, you would actually have numbers for your Social Security, Medicare, and your unemployment. I just had a lump number in here, but the beauty of it is it doesn't matter if they were there for 15 minutes or if they were there for an hour and a half. QuickBooks takes care of, number one, it takes care of prorating it for you, and number two, then you get the actual cost. The other comment I wanted to make on payroll when you have it in QuickBooks is sometimes people have either gotten a raise during the season, or you may have brought in a new employee, someone left and they're in at a lower. Here you get the actual cost instead of maybe what you figured. But this does pull in the burden of the labor, so to speak, what it really costs to have them on that job site for that amount of time. And you can pull in, most times you don't see all this detail, but you can pull in the columns so you can. The other report that I see a lot of people take a look at is the profit and loss for the job. And the percentage here is looking at profit margin, which is different than markup, because you mark up your prices to get to your profit margin. So number one, this is never going to match, or I shouldn't say never, but it's generally not going to match what you have for your markup. But number two, it will also be different from what you see over in LMN. LMN, you are working on a profit margin, but what's great about their estimating is they want you to make sure that you include the overhead that you obviously to run the business, right? Not just for the jobs, but the overhead to run your company, and also equipment wear and tear. And that doesn't show up in this section. It actually shows up in the lower section of your profit and loss. So this will always be higher than what you see for LMN, but still is a good number to be able to work with when you're trying to work on your estimating for future jobs. So we've looked at LMN syncing the estimates over to QuickBooks, and then what you can do with that. We've looked at how the time can come over into QuickBooks, so you can job cost the labor, and that's in the desktop versions. You're not able to job cost the labor in the same way in QuickBooks Online. You can monitor job costs, different reports, but we looked at the committed cost report, and we looked at LMN syncing over to QuickBooks and invoicing from your estimates in QuickBooks, and then the job cost reporting that you can see in QuickBooks, just kind of as a recap. And so we would like you, we do think these products work really well together, and hopefully you've seen some of that, how they do work together today. And we do actually have some promotional offers, and you can go to this website. Currently there, you can save up to 40% on the QuickBooks Desktop Enterprise, and then LMN is also offering the LMN Pro for the price of the LMN Basic, which I think is a really sweet deal. So Jason, any questions or comments?
Yeah, so thank you, Monica, for all the insights there. It's clear how, using these two programs together can definitely save you a lot of time and give you some great essential information that's going to help people run and manage their businesses better. At this time, I just did want to remind all attendees that we're happy to take your questions if you want to submit those through the meeting window. And we do have a few questions here already. So I have a question from Nadia that says, if there's a way that you suggest to deal with overhead as far as job costing overhead in QuickBooks.
There are a couple ways, and so one is you can certainly not that I'm a fan of journal entries, but one is you could do a journal entry. You'd have to have a way of determining what percentage of your overhead you want to allocate to the job. Different ways to do that. But you could do a journal entry to move that, and then maybe up in the cost of goods section, you might have an account that you call allocated overhead. That will put it in the P&L format by using a journal entry because it works from your chart of accounts. If you wanted to do it on a more detailed level, then there's another way that we can do it where you could use items that might identify more specifically in that, what part of the overhead you are allocating to the job. And then maybe you want to have equipment separated out from office staff or something. And then there is a trick that we can use where we can move it from down below up to above without, again, the key here is you don't want to double expense any of your overhead, right? But there is a trick to do that. And I really beyond the scope of today, but to answer your question, there are a couple different ways that you can do it. It just depends on the report you want to look at and as to which method we might use.
Awesome. And I know even in the LMN estimate as well, every estimate is going to tell you roughly, how much overhead you're expecting to recover, which may help with figuring out what percentage to allocate to your overhead there too. We do have a couple more questions here. There's a few about QuickBooks Online, it looks like. So can you job cost with QuickBooks Online? And is there any reports, if any, that you would recommend?
So the job costing in QuickBooks Online is limited. You can't do an estimated versus actual in QuickBooks Online. So the estimate, similar to the desktop, pulls from your products and services in QuickBooks Online, but there are actually no specific job cost reports in QuickBooks Online. So there is no estimated versus actual. You can create a budget of which would work off of your chart of accounts. You could create a budget for the job, and then you can run a budget versus actual for the job. You can do that in QuickBooks Desktop, but since we can do the estimated versus actual, we really can't. The labor at this point, they're still not able to do the job costing on the labor. I do know that that's on the roadmap. We could take a look at, there might be some ways that we could grab some general numbers that we could use and see if there's a way to kind of pull it into some sort of a job cost report. But typically for right now, there really are no job cost reports. So it is somewhat limited. I get the beauty of being able to do things on the phone and being remote. There are ways that you can do the desktop version remote, not really on your phone, but you can definitely do remote access with the desktop products as well.
Okay, great. So, I mean, with that in mind, do you typically recommend, QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop, one over the other, or does it kind of vary depending on the situation?
I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but I do sort of joke. I'm kind of married to the desktop. I do find the desktop just does so much more from a job costing perspective that I have actually had clients that will move off of QuickBooks Online and go into the desktop product because they want the job costing that's there. One other quick comment I wanted to make on QuickBooks Online, because I do think they've got the project feature, and I think that has great potential. I wish they would actually do that in the desktop, but I don't see that happening. But last I've checked that like LMN would not be able to sync the LMN time over to the project. They can sync it to the sub customer and not the project. So keep that in mind when you're working in the QuickBooks Online. If you're using that.
Great. Yeah, that feature we're still waiting for the development to occur where they'll let us kind of sync to that project there. Um, all right, so it looks like we have another question here. When is the best time to start job costing if you're not already? If your company file has been established for many years, do you need to make a new one, or what would you suggest?
I'm always a fan of starting job costing whenever you can. So whether you're new, whether you've been, or whether you haven't done it for a long time, now's as good as any time. Or you can, at least what we're in November, so you could get set up so you could be ready to roll in January if you wanted to. In terms of, do you start a new file or not? It always sounds good, but I will tell you it's also a lot of work. So it comes back to, I hate to say it, it depends. So it depends on the size of your file. Sometimes maybe you're in QuickBooks Pro and Premier and you've got a really large file, then maybe it's as simple as moving you up into Enterprise and then you wouldn't have to do something. Or maybe we do find a way to archive some of the old data. There are a couple resources out there that can actually shrink your file, but you can make things inactive that you no longer use. You don't lose the data. So I'm typically more a fan of making accounts or items or customers inactive instead of actually trying to start something new. That being said, there are times when new might be the way to go, but I would take a look first at, can we just find a way to work with your existing data file? And then you already have your customers, you already have your vendors, and you cut down on a lot of work that way.
Great. And I have another question here about the committed cost report that you showed. I have
Mm-hmm.
someone asking, how often do you recommend syncing the time over to utilize that committed cost report?
Jason can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in order for LMN to calculate the overhead, you would sync the time over on a weekly basis, unless that's changed.
I mean, do you mean the overhead, or sorry, the overtime?
Yeah, if you want LMN to calculate the overtime, what you sync you could sync 1 week. You couldn't do like a date at a time, or is that changed?
I mean, technically, if it's the most current day, you technically could, but the default setting would be for 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, or 4 weeks.
Yeah. I probably would do on a weekly basis. That you've got over an element time that at least you know what your estimated man hours were. That you can kind of monitor that along the way there. But in terms of payroll, it's helpful to have it coming over into QuickBooks where you can see the actual dollars that get connected to it. Also depends too, though, whether you're paying weekly or biweekly and how much time you have between end of the payroll period and when they actually get their paycheck. And I guess I've seen those smaller companies, when you're new, you tend to pay faster. And as you grow, you're like, oh my gosh, we need more time to get payroll ready. So I tend to see like a week, at least a week between when the payroll period ends and when they actually get their paycheck. So then you would have time to look at that reporting.
Great. Okay, and we have another question here saying that they sync estimates into QuickBooks, but the estimate versus actual report always match. What settings do we need to change in LMN to show the actual revenue? So that I can actually take that one. And that one is the in the sync tool. There's an option to check off if you want to bring over just the price or the price and the cost from your estimate. We've got plenty of questions here, Monica, about job costing materials. I'm sure you could probably have a webinar on its own for that topic, but is there anything you suggest there for as far as tracking the materials?
There's a couple things. So on occasion, I will actually recommend if you can do purchase orders in QuickBooks. I know that sometimes seems like a little bit more work, except for the bookkeeper's perspective. If you know that you're ordering materials for different jobs, you can indicate the jobs that they are, number one. And number two, when the bill comes in, it's easy to receive the bill against the purchase order. And it uses the QuickBooks items, so it shows up in the job profitability detail report. So I like it from that perspective. If you're buying in bulk, then there are ways that, if you need to go ahead and you can, especially if you're on a cash basis, which I find the majority of my clients are, that you can go ahead and you can have it, post to your cost of goods account for materials. But but then I've got clients that do it a couple of different ways. I've got some that will do weekly. I've got some that wait until the job is over. But we actually have a way that we use. We call it a $0 check, and we create a separate bank account for that. That obviously isn't a real bank account, and the balance is always zero. But it's a way to kind of move things so you can move them so that they show up in the job profitability detail report, so you can get the detail for some of the materials without double expensing because you've already expensed these. So there are ways to do that. If you're dealing with inventory, then I'm trying to think, because I know that I did this for a couple of my clients. I think we came up with doing a $0 invoice or sales receipt. I have to go back and check my notes on that. But basically, the idea is trying to relieve, move things from where they were so that they show up in your job cost reports. But yes, there are ways, and you're right, Jason. I probably could do a webinar on that, and it probably needs to be on my roadmap.
All right, so lastly, it looks like a couple questions on payroll as well. People asking if it's difficult to kind of switch and manage payroll in-house and dealing with the taxes and workers' comp and things like that. So what would you suggest there for someone that's currently not using QuickBooks for payroll?
I guess, well, number one, it depends on which product they're in. But if they're in the desktop, sometimes I'll suggest as a happy medium would be assisted payroll. And Intuit's assisted payroll, I can get you a lifetime discount on that. So don't call Intuit directly. But if you do the paychecks, they will create, they'll take care of the state and federal tax filings. I think there are 2 states that they don't work with, but off the top of my head, I don't remember what they are, but I can find out. But they're assuming that your numbers are correct. But the Intuit payroll, actually, almost anytime you're going to run payroll, they will update your tax tables, and it doesn't matter if you're, I'm in Maryland and the update was for Washington State. They'll also get the update because they don't know. So you always get updates. So the tax tables will calculate that for you. There's some great payroll reports. So back when I was doing payroll, things weren't as automated. So I did have reports that I would monitor, that I would take a look at to confirm. And I was having to mail the returns into the IRS of the state. But I'm dating myself, I know. But there are definitely ways that you can double check your numbers. But now you can actually e-pay and e-file right inside of QuickBooks. The one thing I will comment on when you're working, if you're going to do assisted payroll, they will help you get set up when you, but they're just focused on basically making sure that covering their, just making sure that they're covered, because they're going to guarantee, but they're guaranteeing based on the data you send them. So they want to make sure you've got things in some correct places. The one thing that they don't do is they don't take into they don't think about that you need to track your field labor separate from your office staff. So your field labor. So anytime I've got someone working with assisted payroll, I let assisted payroll do their thing, and then we go back in and we make some adjustments so that we can make sure that we've got the office staff separated out from the field staff, and so that you get the numbers in the respective places that you want. When you first turn on payroll in QuickBooks, everything just goes down to overhead, and obviously your crews aren't overhead. So that's the adjustment, but that's one way. And then if you're comfortable with doing payroll after a while, then you could just do it all yourself. So I do have a lot of clients that run payroll all themselves, and then I do have a lot of clients that still outsource. But you can also turn on, in the desktop, you can turn on workers' comp tracking. It won't go retroactive, so depends. If your premium started a few months ago, it's not going to go back. But from the day you turn it on going forward, it will track the workers' comp code. And I know LMN can track workers' comp, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, it's not available in the API. Put that on the list to request. So, but then you can run some really nice reports that make those workers' comp audits easier too.
All right, great. Thank you for that. We do, if we didn't get to your question, Phil will be reaching out to answer those as well. On behalf of LMN, I did want to thank Monica for her time today and all attendees for joining us. Another question just came in there. We will be sending this webinar out as well to all attendees that have registered, so don't worry about that. We are super excited for this partnership, and we know it's going to provide great value to our members. If anyone would like more information on QuickBooks Enterprise or setting up any of the information that was covered today, please feel free to reach out to Monica and her team at the email on your screen there, and we will be sending out all the contact information there as well to all the attendees after the event within the next day or so. So we covered a lot of information in QuickBooks today, information that obviously came from LMN. But if you do need a hand getting your LMN information over to QuickBooks, please feel free to reach out to LMN's support team as well, and we'd be happy to help you there. Our email is support@golmn.com, and we can put you in touch with your account rep to help get that sorted. So thank you again to all attendees, and to you, Monica. Thank you very much for your time.
You are
And
certainly welcome. I'm glad I could do it with you guys.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. It was really great. So thank you and have a great day, everybody.